Dr. Walsh, Dr. Pappas, thanks for coming to the headquarters here at Avalon Biomed in Houston. Pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate your time. Hey, just to kind of kick things off, I just wanted to kind of get some background on your dental school residency and kind of what you're up to now.
I'm from Iowa. I went to college and dental school at the University of Iowa. I got the opportunity to come to Texas for my residency at Texas A&M Baylor College of Dentistry, and got here, as they say, I got here as fast as I could. Once I got here, I decided never to leave, and I now practice just outside of the DFW Metroplex in Keller, Texas.
Awesome.
I've been there for the last 9 years.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Pappas?
So I'm originally from New York. Attended SUNY at Buffalo School of Dental Medicine to receive my DDS, followed by my GPR residency at Stony Brook University Hospital. I eventually made it down to Houston, where I completed my certificate in endodontics and received my master's degree as well. That was last year, and I've been in private practice in the Woodlands as a partner in private practice for about a year.
Oh, that's fantastic. And thanks again for taking time, guys. I really appreciate getting your feedback and kind of the story on your journey with both the bioceramic portion of Avalon Biomed and the file system as well, the endodontic system. Just to kind of kick things off, what prompted you to look at the bioceramics at Avalon?
That's a great question. I've been interested in bioceramics ever since I was in residency 10, 11 years ago. And so I've actually got introduced to Avalon Biomed products about at that time. And so that we were working on some of the prototype products, working on some of the self-mix Neo-MTA products. And so I've been connected with them ever since some of the foundations were laid for the new pre-mix sealer and putty. And so I've been interested in those and helping them work through some of the prototypes of those for the last decade. So
10 years, wow.
Yeah, so it's been a pretty integral part of our practice for a long time.
Awesome. Dr. Pappas?
So in residency, part of my thesis was looking at the physicochemical and biologic properties of bioceramic sealers. So naturally, gathering sealers together and comparing them was important to the research. And one of the sealers we chose was NeoSealer Flow from Avalon Biomed. Really liked the way it handled, really liked the results of the study. And so when entering private practice, it only felt natural to bring one of the sealers from that study into private practice, and that sealer was NeoSealer Flow.
Well, that's great. I'm just curious as to some of the specifics of why you made that choice.
Sure. So some of the studies we looked at included the flow of the sealer, solubility, calcium ion release, radiopacity, and NeoSealer Flow did extremely well in all those studies. And that's really the quality of sealer that you're looking for when trying to incorporate a sealer into your practice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yourself?
Yeah, I feel the same way as Dr. Pappas, in that I think the bioactivity, the flowability of the material, but things also that I consider the flexibility and the ease of use in practice. I can use that same sealer for cold techniques, for warm techniques. I don't have to pivot and use another product. I can use that same product through and through. And one thing that we're thinking about nowadays is the bottom line. And so the bottom line here is that the NeoSealer Flow is more cost effective than other options on the market.
That's great. So specifically, can you tell me within treatment some of the advantages of the sealer?
Yeah, most definitely. One of the things I like the best is that it comes with a flex flow tip. And so that's a low waste tip. Not only does it have a small cannula that fits deep into the tooth, I can very precisely administer that into the apical third of the canal, but it's also not wasting any material. I know I'm not leaving any material behind in the tip that could be used to fill other canals. And the other thing, keeping in mind on that same vein, is that helps the bottom line. Reducing waste is always a good thing.
Absolutely.
So coming from an academic study and then putting into private practice, you can notice things that may seem excellent on paper, but really are practical in clinical life. And one of those things is the way it handles with warm vertical and application of heat. By applying heat to the canals around 200 to 250 degrees Celsius, there's really no clumping noticed. I'm able to condense and not desiccate the canals, which is really important, especially with the properties of calcium ion release that I noted earlier. It's just an excellent sealer, especially in our hands.
So hearing you both, is there any type of obturation that you can't use this sealer with?
I think that's the beauty of this product, is that I feel comfortable using this with all teeth that come in. I don't have to pivot to another product. I just have this one sealer and it handles all of my needs. If I need something that's a little thicker or to fill a larger canal, well, then we have Neo Putty or the self-mix materials right right alongside. So we're using one family of bioactive products to treat every single case that comes through my practice.
So per our conversation earlier today, I'd be really interested to hear from you why you even chose to take a look at a different system.
That's funny that you asked.
I was going to say, that made you laugh.
Yeah. As an endodontist, I am just adverse to change in general. I think that's the nature of the beast. So I wasn't looking for a file system. It's one of those things where Christian just came to me and asked if I'd be willing to try something for him. I said, sure. As a friend, I'd be happy to try it for you. And one thing led to another, and all of a sudden we started trying this and started enjoying it. And my partners and I both used it. And the only question we had at the end of the samples was, where can we get more and when can we get more? So it's one of those things we stumbled on upon blind luck. It really just kind of fell into our lap and we ended up falling in love with it. And since that time, we've been exclusively using the Avalon file system.
So just before I move over to Dr. Pappas, compelling reasons you fell in love with it, wanted more of it. What are kind of the top one or two reasons why? Why did it make you want to change?
Again, great question. I have three criteria that I think really fit this file system well, and I call it the DEFs of the Avalon file system: durability, efficiency, and flexibility. I feel like I can use these files with a lot of confidence, not being concerned if they're going to start to unwind or separate like we had talked earlier. I feel like they navigate canals superiorly compared to other file systems that I've used in the past, and I definitely don't have to worry about obturating canals with nickel titanium because they're so flexible and durable that I feel very confident.
Absolutely. Dr. Pappas?
Yeah, so Dr. Walsh is 100% correct. Change is tough. Coming right out of residency, you're almost ingrained in a way that you've learned, and sometimes change can be hard. However, you're always maybe questioning that maybe there's a better system out there. And so while I did enjoy my system that I was using from residency, I was definitely eager, a little bit maybe more eager than Dr. Walsh, to try a new system, to try to get my hands on something that was maybe working better in my hands. And so Christian approached me as well, and I was more than happy to try out the new system, and I've been enjoying it ever since.
What are some of the specific reasons that you enjoyed, from the get-go, the system?
So my system that I'm currently using actually requires me to mix and match files from different manufacturers and different brands. And so having all my files that get my results that I'm looking for under one family of instruments is extremely, extremely helpful and very easy to use. And just like Dr. Walsh mentioned, very confident when putting a file on a canal. One of the drawbacks that I had with my original system was I was noticing some separations, some unwinding of files. And once you take away a lot of those problems, you actually notice that you become more confident and can attack problems in different cases with a little bit more confidence.
Was there a big change in technique, or did the system kind of look like your other systems, but with some benefits that you mentioned?
It's a good question. So it's different enough that you understand that it's a different file system. However, it's keeping a lot of the same principles. And I think that's important when switching to a new file system is being able to take techniques that you do enjoy and apply them to, in our opinion, better files. Trying to learn a new system with new files and basically relearn endo is not ideal when you're in practice.
And as we were talking earlier, I kind of understood and found out that you guys don't do the same thing clinically. And the system allows you to do two different things.
It'll be hard to find endodontists, I think, that will all agree on a single technique.
Agreed.
And so I think this suite of files really encompasses all our needs.
From a technique standpoint.
Yeah, what I really like that Dr. Papps has already touched on is that it's easy to learn because it's labeled similarly to things we've used in the past, such as Pro Taper. So now we have Z1, 2, 3, 4, up through 7. And those things are very parallel to systems we've used in the past. But rather than combining Pro Taper with a Vortex or Pro Taper with a Sapphire, we have the same ability to do that all under one family. So we can take the system start to finish all the way through the blue shapers, or we can switch and go to apical shapers. So in the cases where we're trying to be more minimally invasive, we can use the slim shapers or apical shapers, which really have special properties and special focuses to help clean those areas of the canals so that we're maintaining a conservative access, conservative shaping, but still chemomechanically debriding the canal space, as we know is important.
So from a technique standpoint, it sounds like it's got some flexibility there. Not a lot of I have to do something different, but maybe just some advances in technology.
Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. And I think all of those advances are very intuitive once you have the file system in hand.
Is there any canals or situations within a patient that this system couldn't handle, that you'd have to go outside?
That it can't handle?
Yes. Calcification,
I don't think there's any case that I
uppers,
don't.
lowers.
Yeah, I don't think
small
there's any
base.
case that I would be concerned about taking these files to approach. Whether it's pedo larger spaces, we have the Z6, the Z7 to accommodate those, with also maintaining some flexibility. But as far as the calcified, the multi-curvatures, we'll show some cases later on that I think really exemplify why these files are a cut above the rest and are truly the sixth generation of rotary files to come to the market.
What's been your experience with the variety of cases you see in your office?
I agree. There's really no case that's come through my door that has made me reach for a different system or doubt the system that's in my hand. So again, there's cases where we see this all the time, open apices, cases where we need a very large file, very small file, very thin file. These cases are all handled by the instruments that we've been given.
And how do you guys kind of walk me through your experience and your story of how the files mirror up to the sealer and your obturation technique?
One of the things that I liked best when I got these files was they had corresponding gutta percha points as well as paper points. So I feel that when I'm entering the obturation process, I can thoroughly dry. I know I'm getting contact with the canal space to thoroughly dry. But equally as important, they're a variable taper. So a traditional cone, unless you're doing some type of heated technique, isn't going to conform to that exact shape. And so these variable taper cones that are made to follow these file patterns are impeccable. They fit very well. I feel like that lends itself to doing a single cone technique with NeoSealer flow, placing that sealer in the apical third, and then introducing the Avalon file cone. And I think it fits and adapts very well.
Limiting variability during obturation is key. Making sure that the steps from your finishing file to your final radiograph are in line is important. So having those paper points fit, having those gutta percha points fit makes life a lot easier. When you're working through a case.
So thank you for that information about your technique and how kind of one system mirrors the other. I was wondering if you could go a little bit deeper and how you chose which files from Avalon that would work best with your current technique, that there wouldn't be a big technique change.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I had mentioned earlier that the Avalon Biomed files mirror some of the pro taper instruments going S1 or Z1 all the way up. And so to me, that's an intuitive switch. One of the things I think is a step ahead with Avalon files is the pink metallurgy. It's the only multi-alloy file system on the market right now. And so they utilize the pink alloy as their Z1 or their initial coronal shaper canal navigation file. It's flexible in that it's a small diameter file, but it's robust in that it uses the pink metallurgy, which is kind of a happy medium between the blue and the gold. So working my way up from Z1, then we get into the blue metallurgy of Z2. Most of the time I skip Z3 because I feel that that's kind of a redundant file with Z2.
And this is all part of the Blue Shaper family?
All part of the Blue Shaper family. So move from Blue Shaper Z1, 2, up to 4. And that's equivalent to about a 2506, give or take. And so from there, I can either decide to follow up the Blue Shaper line and go up to Z7 or Z6, more like an 06 type of canal. Or if I'm trying to be a little bit more conservative, or I think it's an 04 taper type of canal, I'll switch to the apical shapers, which I think are a beautiful asset or complement to the Blue Shaper file system because they're that parallelogram, cross section, and they're an 03 taper. So you get the best of both worlds. You get an efficient cutting file that really allows you to finesse that apical 1 or 2 millimeters, which we all know is the most critical part in a root canal.
Absolutely. So what's the smallest apical shaper as far as tip and taper? And then what is the largest? What's the biggest?
So the smallest apical shaper is a 3003 and the largest is a 5003.
And does that encompass the majority of the canals you see?
Yeah, by far and away it encompasses the majority. I mean, there's always going to be a few outliers both above and below, but I think day in and day out of the routine cases, these are hitting 95%.
Awesome. Dr. Pappas, what was your previous system, and then how did you find that match within Avalon?
a fairly similar technique. One being starting with pro taper, trying to enlarge that coronal third, being able to safely and easily get our files down to the apical third. So starting with a Z1 and a Z2, creating that glide path and that flaring in the coronal third. And then afterwards, once I've been able to reach working length, I have been using the apical shaper a little bit more frequently. I like keeping that conservative in the apical third, and then also using my warm vertical technique to fill in the slightly larger coronal third. I found that the gutta percha cones work extremely well. We're working with an O3 taper, so it's a different taper than we're used to, but keeping that conservative has been excellent.
What does good look like for you from a coronal flare standpoint?
Yeah, so wide enough that we're able to access the middle and apical third, but not wide enough that we're encroaching on some danger zones. There's different anatomy in different teeth, and putting a large instrument into these dangerous zones can create a failure that maybe could have been avoided with a different instrument.
What do you use for the bigger teeth, the teeth that need a bigger coronal flare? Yes. Is there an instrument for that?
The blue shaper offers larger files, right? So the Z6, Z7, these files can be used in larger canals. And what that does is allows debridement of walls that are obviously further apart, and keeps our preps in a form that is able to be obturated with the corresponding gutta percha cones.
And are you making a lot of adjustments to your gutta percha cones as far as, apex, using the scissors, clipping, adjusting?
I'm not. I don't know if you're seeing that, but I'm seeing that from my finishing file to paper point to gutta percha, a very consistent fit, a very reliable fit, and that's definitely improving the cases.
And one of the things that I like as well about talking about that coronal flaring is that the blue shapers are all less than 1 millimeter in the maximum instrument diameter. So I feel that even if you are increasing up to the Z6, which is a 4007 variable, or a Z7, which is a 5007 or take variable taper, you're still maintaining the maximum instrument diameter of less than 1. So you're still being minimally invasive while allowing maximum chemomechanical debridement. Absolutely. All within the same realm.
And in talking to you guys earlier with your previous techniques, your maximum flute diameter was 1.2. Right around there.
Yeah, with the conventional files and the pro taper system, you're going to end up with a 1.2 at your coronal flare, and that's just the nature of the beast.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear about if this system allows you to do retreats.
One of the things I like most about this system is it has completely changed the way that I do retreats. For the last 9 years, 10 years, if you include residency, I've been using copious amounts of solvent, mainly chloroform, to dissolve the gutta percha and then kind of help auger through it. And one of the things that I found with this file system is that I can use the Z4, which is the 2507 variable taper, put that at 650 RPMs without any solvent, and it does an incredible job at removing the gutta percha. I try not to take that to length. I don't want to disrupt my apical seal or distort my apical anatomy, but getting the coronal 2/3 of that gutta percha out really quickly and efficiently without altering the anatomy is huge. And then I can go back and add just a little bit of chloroform at the end and work my hand files to get there. But this has completely changed how I've done my root canal retreatments ever since I started using the Avalon file system.
And what file works best for you for that purpose?
I think it's the Z4. Okay. They recommend running it at 500 RPMs. But Avalon also recommends endo your way. So how I endo my way is turn it up to 650 and it flawlessly goes through the gutta percha without having to worry about any adverse side effects such as separating the file or distorting the canal anatomy.
What's been your experience with retreats?
Very similar. One thing I've noticed is the reduction in solvent use. Not having solvent in the process of removing coronal gutta percha is extremely helpful. Why? Well, we can see what we're doing. It doesn't make messes. It doesn't get everywhere. Well, with the Z4, I'm able to remove the coronal 2/3 of gutta percha and use just a tiny bit of solvent with a smaller, less aggressive file to then clean the apical third.
And what's that file that works best in your hands for retreats?
So the Z4 is excellent. Dr. Walsh actually was one of the people who recommended it to me, that technique, that increasing the RPMs. And that's what's great, is that you're flexible and able to use these files and change a little bit about them and make it work in your hands.
I totally agree. And another thing that I like about that is that previous files, whether it's Vortex Blue, Edge Sapphire, whether it's Pro Taper Gold, they seem to unwind or they're just too flexible to get into the gutta percha even to begin with. And so that's not the case here. Although they're very flexible and move around curves, when there's not gutta percha during an initial treatment, during retreatment, they engage that gutta percha very effectively, much to my surprise, but I think it's a very welcome surprise during my course of treatment.
So of the blue shapers, I really like incorporating the ZX. It is an orifice opener and allows me to gain access and feel more confident about putting a longer file like a Z1 or a Z2 into that canal. And the ZX of the blue shaper group of files works great for that.
So you're speaking about the ZX and how that's a great file for you for opening the orifice. Can you get into some specifics on that?
Orifice openers can be extremely useful. Sometimes orifice openers, depending on the manufacturer, may be too stiff. And those can be very dangerous if you're trying to stick something into a canal that's not open wide enough. You can transport and make the case harder for yourself. Some are too flexible, and you're not able to get into a canal because the tip may bend or break before you're in a canal. What I really like about the ZX is it's flexible enough that I feel confident that I'll be able to lift dentin as I brush, but stiff enough that I am going to penetrate into the canal. The brushing motion of that file really pulls a lot of tooth structure in places where you want tooth structure pulled away, and allows me to confidently then enter the canal with, say, a Z1 or a Z2 following that file.
So, Dr. Pappas, would you be willing to walk us through orifice to apex, just your technique and how you use the files?
Absolutely. So my protocol takes into account some coronal flaring. So my previous system, Pro Taper, using their files to open up that coronal 2/3. But with the blue shaper, I'm able to open up that same area with the ZX, the Z1, and the Z2. After establishing working length, I'm able to then shape the apical third. Previously was using a system from Edge Endo called the X7. However, now with the apical shaper, I'm able to effectively complete the same type of apical shaping that I desire, however, at a more conservative and more minimally invasive way with an O3 taper.
So you had mentioned that you like to finish on O3 preps. Do you have any trouble with your standard O4 cones fitting the O3s?
No. It's been really nice that you're able to then fit that O4 cone in. My cone fits have been perfect. Haven't really noticed any problems obturating, which is remarkable because, when you're changing your taper, one of the things you're concerned about is that your old armamentarium is not going to, be compatible.
For sure. One of the things that I've noticed is oftentimes I drop cones. So I finish my apical size and then I drop cones. So that really doesn't come into play as much if I'm going from a 3 to a 4 taper because one size smaller.
Which is going to bring your cone up a little bit, which is just going to, improve that seat.
For sure. And you're allowing for more sealer-centric obturation.
Yeah. For sure.
How do you feel about the Avalon Biomed cones? How do you feel like they're fitting the preps? Are you using those when you're finishing?
I think they're great. I think that we touched about this earlier, but having a file and a cone that work in concert with each other is just paramount. Mm-hmm. Having that fit snug, match the size, especially with a variable taper. I mean, you're using the blue shapers more. Those are variable tapers. You need a cone that's going to fit that.
One of the things I've also thought was really interesting that my assistants like was the paper points. They feel that they can be more conservative on the paper points, not have to open pack after pack, but can pick just 2 or 3 given the case, and those are able to fit down the canals very effortlessly because they're also tailored for that same variable taper.
And the way they're packaged, right? So they're not packaged in the traditional little slim open packs. They're packaged like gutta percha, which is in reality, they're the same size, same shape. Why not keep the same packaging?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant packaging.
So being fresh out of residency, you're looking for a file system or at least a way of performing endodontic treatment that works for you. It works really well in your hands. And, constantly communicating with peers, trying to figure out, we've all left residency. Well, what's working for him? What's working for her? And so I've just been so happy to have found this group of products all under one roof. There seems to be just a file for every sort of treatment under the sun. And I really can't wait to be able to share this with peers and explain, hey, this file works great in my hands for this. Well, it works also in my hands for that. And just collaborating on what seems like a whole new world of endodontic files.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like we mentioned earlier, after using the files for a few months, my partner's only feedback was, "How can we get more, and when can we get more?" So I'm very happy that we found this file system, and I can't wait to continue to incorporate this into my practice. And one of the hardest things about using these files over the last few months is not being able to share it with anybody.
Right.
So I'm finally excited to be able to get the opportunity to share this with the rest of the world and rest of the country, that there's something new and better out there.
So, Dr. Walsh, and speaking of the files and the obturation and the sealer system, this system also comes with capital equipment, handpieces, if you will. So, wanted to see what your thoughts are, and then, as importantly, how you use it.
Sure. There's two available handpieces, the Z Evo and the Z Evo Mini. I've personally had a lot more use with the Evo Mini because I feel like it's easy to use, it's lightweight and portable. One of the things that I like most about it, as a cordless handpiece, it doesn't diminish in torque as you're progressing your files down the canals. The manufacturer's recommended speed is 500 RPM at 4 Newton centimeters, and I follow the 500 RPM, but I dropped my torque down to 2.6. I still haven't had any trouble allowing the files to progress down the canals adequately. I don't feel like it stops and backs me out like a lot of the previous generations of cordless handpieces.
So the cordless handpiece that I've been using has been the Z Evo. I really like the balance and the weight in my hands. It's a little bit bigger than the Evo Mini, but it feels solid in your hands and it feels balanced. Doesn't feel like it's going to tip out of your hand. I do also like the battery life. I really haven't seen a diminished torque later on in the day. Sometimes these cordless handpieces can lose battery life and become a problem later in the day. I've noticed that my torque setting is a little lower, 2.4, but I've noticed that towards the end of the day, my instrumentation does not change, and I don't feel any difference with my files.
So, Dr. Pappas, I'd be interested to hear about your obturation technique. I think I'm correct in saying that you do warm vertical.
Correct.
This system has a down pack and a flow, a Z up and a Z down, as they call it. Just wanted to get your experience and how you use it.
So I've been using these products for several months. Correct. I use a warm vertical condensation method, which requires a down pack and a back fill. The Z down is the instrument that I'm using for the down pack. What's great about this instrument is the ergonomics. It's got a 360 touch ring around the exterior handpiece. And what that does is allows you to be able to activate your heat in any position. It's sometimes, as we like to try to practice quality ergonomics, sometimes you're in a compromised position, and being able to activate heat while under a microscope and complete a down pack is extremely helpful. So the Z Up is the device I've been using to complete obturation. And it's a push button activated device that releases gutta percha in small bursts. What I like about this is you can release in small bursts and then condense, limiting the chance for any voids. And also the ergonomics of it allow the tip to be placed in the canal and provide plenty of room for your microscope to be able to see the canal and make sure that your canal is properly condensed. There's different temperature settings, and I like using the temperature setting of 200 degrees Celsius. I think it melts the pellets that are placed in the mechanism properly and completes our obturation extremely well.
And I think one of the things that I like also is that you can dial it in between 200 and 250, but it's also push button activated. So it's similar to the old Calamus units, but you don't have to be tied to those little cartridges. You can use the generic gutta percha pellets and refill that continuously, so you don't have to buy any extra equipment or any aftermarket things to fit your piece of equipment.
And I've noticed that the tips are extremely durable.
Absolutely.
The last thing you want is a tip breaking after multiple bends. I've been bending these multiple times and have noticed no loss of integrity to the tips.
And the tips are quite long, actually.
Yeah,
I feel like
beneficial.
Yeah, it is beneficial. I feel like I have nice visibility, nice access around it, like you had mentioned before, as I'm backfilling, so I know exactly what level I'm going to.
So with the push button activation, it releases a short burst of gutta percha. What's nice about this short burst is I've noticed that I'm not pulling the gutta percha out with the instrument. That's very beneficial because it reduces the amount of redos of replacing gutta percha, which can be time consuming. By placing that small burst and removing the instrument, I'm able to gently compact that gutta percha and then add more if I need. So there's certain presets that allow for a short amount of heat, say 3 seconds. I prefer a more continuous stream of heat. And so anytime I'm placing the device, I have a preset that allows continuous heat when applying pressure to the ring around the instrument. This allows me to apply heat only during the time that I would like to.
Another piece of equipment that the system offers is the Z activator, the ultrasonic Z activator. Wanted to see if you've had an experience with it and the applications that you like to use it and why.
I really like this device. I've been using it for several months. I have gone from an endo activator, which is a sonic activator, to now an ultrasonic activator that's handheld. Being able to pass this back to an assistant and actually see when using debris coming from the canals. There's different tips that match the size of the canal, but I've really noticed debris coming up much different than sonic activation. I've noticed many lateral canals present after debriding with my files. I've really noticed that in combination with our irrigants, by using this device, I've noticed more patent lateral canals. Using a sealer like the NeoSealer Flow that has a great flowability, being able to penetrate those lateral canals. So I actually have a few cases that demonstrate the whole suite of Avalon Biomed products that we've covered today, if you'd like to see them.
That'd be great.
Okay, so the first case, this is a tooth number 30, symptomatic irreversible pulpitis with symptomatic apical periodontitis diagnosis. For example, on this case, I used a mix of several of Avalon Biomed's files, ranging from apical shaper and the blue shaper. For the orifice opening, I used a ZX from the blue shaper file system, and then shaped the coronal 2/3 with the Z1 and Z2. After establishing working length, I then completed the shaping of the entire canal system, and then finished the case with the apical shaper up to a size 4003. After complete debridement of the canal system, I decided to irrigate the system with sodium hypochlorite and activate that irrigant with the Z activator. Unknowingly, the Z activator opened up several lateral canals, and then the case was obturated with Avalon Biomed's NeoSealer Flow and Avalon Biomed's pressure points. I used the Z up and the Z down for warm vertical condensation. So my down pack was completed with the Z down, and then my backfill with the Z up. As you can see in the final, there's a lateral canal in mid-root on the distal root, which was opened during debridement and activation of irrigant. Here's another case I used several Avalon Biomed products on. This is a tooth number 4, previously treated with symptomatic apical periodontitis. As you can note on the pre-op, there's a large area of low density on the lateral aspect of tooth number 4. When I see this, we're thinking uncleaned lateral canals. And so taking out this material, being able to debride the canal system and open up or make this canal patent is extremely important in the retreatment success. So we talked about this earlier, but using the Z4 from the blue shaper system to retrieve this previous obturation material worked really well. Only needed to use some solvent for the apical third. And then the case was obturated using Avalon Biomed bioceramic sealers. After the previous obturation material was removed, I shaped the canal system to a Z5. I obturated the case with NeoSealer Flow. After the previous material was removed, the case was instrumented to a Z5 from the blue shaper system. Irrigation was completed, and I used the Z activator to try to activate that irrigant as much as I could to try to gain some patency. As you can see on the final, after obturating the case, again with gutta percha and NeoSealer Flow, and using the Z up and Z down, you see that there is a trail of that sealer right to the center of that area of low density that was noted on the scan. These are cases you really like to see this lateral canal headed right toward that radiolucency, which makes you much more confident letting the patient leave and expecting them back for a 6-month recall showing full healing. Here's another case showing a relatively advanced case of external cervical resorption. As you can see or appreciate on the pre-op CBCT, there is a small lingual perforation. I opted to treat this case. The patient was complaining of discomfort associated with the lingual perforation, so non-surgical root canal treatment was completed. The case was obturated with NeoSealer Flow in the apical and middle third, and then Neo Putty was placed in the coronal third. As you can see or appreciate on the final post-op CBCT, there was significant removal of structure at that lingual perforation, and the Neo Putty effectively sealed the perforation. The 6-month recall showed no loss of attachment and no advancement of resorption, and the patient is asymptomatic.
Well, that's really interesting. I think some of these, either say class 2, class 3 resorptions are some of the most challenging cases that we see, and unfortunately, we're starting to see them all too frequently. Let me show you a case that I've done that's very similar to yours, where this patient presented and she had no idea that there was any issue at all. And come to find out on number 26, she had class 3 cervical resorption. And so in this case, I didn't have the heart to tell this 25-year-old to extract her lower lateral incisor. I think that's a challenging place for an implant. I think that's a challenging restorative prognosis overall. And so in this case, what we did is we treated it. So I did internal repair without surgery, and we got a wonderful result. In this case, I filled the apical portion with gutta percha and neosealar flow, and above that, I placed neoputty. So anywhere subcrestally where I may have resorptive perforations or communications with the osseous tissues, I placed neoputty. And above that, I restored it with Fuji 9 to help promote any epithelial attachment once it's above the level of crestal bone. And we saw this young lady back on 3-year recall and took a 3-year recall CBCT and found that we're not seeing any progression of the resorption. We're seeing nice epithelial attachment, and equally, we're seeing solid osseous tissue without any periapical reactionary changes. The next case I wanted to show was one where I thought Slim Shaper worked really well for us. This next case is a lower second molar on a young lady, and it just has multiple curvatures. It has multiple curvatures in both the mesial and the distal roots. And, for tooth nerds like us, this is kind of fun and exciting stuff, especially when I have the armamentarium to approach this. And I think the Avalon Biomed family of rotary instruments provides the perfect armamentarium to combine their systems and attack this the best we can. And so what I did in this particular case was that I started with Slim Shapers, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to create a ledge with one of my stainless steel hand files. I wanted to make sure I had patency, that I successfully negotiated both curvatures, both in the distal and the mesial root. Once I was able to get down with the Slim Shaper, I progressed through the 3 series of Slim Shapers, and then I was able to take my Z1, followed by my Z2, down to length. And so using those Slim Shapers to the advantage of these small, ornate curvatures, and then slowly enlarging with really super flexible instruments is combining all the best attributes of the Avalon products. So you ever run into those pedo cases where they're hard to treat because it's a hard patient and a hard kid?
I have.
Sometimes I think those are really challenging from a completely different aspect, because now you're managing the parent, you're managing the squiggling patient, and you're managing a severe curvature in a tooth. And in those young teeth, we know that the walls can be thinner because they may not be fully developed. We know that they're in general going to have larger canal anatomy. And so in some aspects, that makes it an easier, more straightforward case because we can find the canals. But the next concern there is, how do we negotiate them and successfully maintain our minimally invasive approach? Well, I think this is a perfect case demonstrating how apical shapers can work to our advantage of maintaining the canal anatomy while maintaining the minimally invasive approach, because I can apically enlarge without having to touch any of the canal walls in the coronal 2/3 of the canal. So I can appropriately instrument that apex to an appropriate size for chemomechanical debridement, and then follow that up with the Avalon Biomed cones corresponding to the apical shaper and create a nice apical seal for that kid.
It's a nice case.
Well, thanks, guys, for sharing the information on those cases. And most importantly, thanks for coming down to Houston. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, our pleasure.
So more importantly, when can we expect to be able to get these in our hands and get these to our colleagues?